up, everybody? It's me, Finch, and today we're going to be talking about some exercises you can do with your black mirror. Now, if you haven't seen the video I made on making a black mirror, I highly recommend you start with that video. I'll link it down below, so go check it out first. We cover not only the fundamentals of scrying, but also how to build your own mirror. So check that video out first if you haven't yet, and then come back here for some great exercises. It's going to be a quick one today. I'm just going to give you a couple exercises and some tips and techniques to really get you on your path. I'm going to be using basically a summary of the course of exercises put out in Franz Barden's Initiation into Hermetics. This is a great book. I highly recommend you check it out if you're interested in magic, and I'm going to get more into the history of this book when we do a video on elemental magic, as Franz Barden has some of the best exercises, I think, for doing elemental magic. But for today, we're just going to be focusing on some of his black mirror exercises. To begin, we need to learn how to visualize. And visualizing is something that a lot of people do automatically without even really noticing that they do it. This may be boring for those of you that do have very visual imaginations and people who do daydream a lot. This is the same fundamental technique. But for someone who's really struggling with visualizing, I want you to try an exercise of placing an object on the desk in front of you. In my case, it can be this book. I'm going to place it here in front of me. I'm going to stare at the book. And then I'm going to close my eyes and try and recreate the scene that I was just looking at with my eyes closed. It may not feel like you're seeing in the same way that we see with our eyes, but being able to know that the book is there, know the proportions of it, and be able to begin to imagine that we are seeing it is the start of full-on visualization. And again, visualization is like a muscle. It may seem dim and cloudy at first, but the more that you do it, we'll find that this muscle grows stronger, and we're actually will have full-on dreamlike visions. Continuing with the technique that we were just working on, I want you to take the object from its place on the desk and move it away. Now look at the spot that it was at, close your eyes, and imagine that it's there. The third thing is to look at the spot where there was this object, perhaps your book, and I want you to look at that spot, close your eyes, and now imagine that some other object that you've never used before is there. This can be a pencil, a pen, any inanimate object works. Once you're able to do this pretty easily, then you're ready to start scrying and trying some of these techniques. So these techniques are preliminary. I know they seem pretty rudimentary, but I guarantee it that there are some people who have never tried this before. So for you, please try it out, and I think you will be surprised at how easy it is to visualize something. Well, exercise 1 is the same process that I just described, but now we are going to be projecting that imagination onto the surface of the mirror. This sounds more complicated than it is. We're going to be doing the last technique where we looked at a spot on the desk where there was an object and imagining that object is there. But try that with our eyes open. So I want you to sit down in front of your black mirror or your scrying surface. If you don't have one, then remember, go check out the previous video so you can get your own for cheap and easy. Once you've procured your surface, I want you to sit down in front of it, quiet your mind, and gaze upon the mirror. While we're focusing on silencing our inner monologue, I want you to choose an object that you will visualize on the surface of the mirror. Now, I don't know how else to explain it, but there is definitely a difference between imagining the object in our mind and imagining the object on the surface of the mirror. The more that you practice this, you will be able to very clearly start to see these images appear on the surface of the mirror. This can take some time, but the practice begins with inanimate objects. So sit down in front of the mirror, eyes open, quiet your mind, and begin to imagine an inanimate object. For me, I often choose an apple. I don't know why, but that is the first thing that I choose. Once you're able to clearly imagine an apple on the surface of the mirror, I want you to try another object. And for now, that's all your practice needs to be. Sit down and try this for 5 to 10 minutes a day and stick with it for at least a week. you should begin to start seeing some improvement in your ability to visualize these objects. The next part of this exercise is to move up to animate objects, usually starting with animals and then eventually people. When we work on people, I want you to start with faces of people that you know, and then eventually faces that maybe you've never seen before. Once you're comfortable imagining faces, then move on to full bodies, figures, forms. And the final phase of this exercise is to imagine scenes unfolding in front of you. This can take a while to work up to, and there's no rush in this practice. This is like going to the gym. There's never going to be a point where you can't see benefits from this practice. The more that you do it, the easier it will get, and the stronger your visual ability will become. So a couple other exercises suggested by Barden involve contacting other beings. So we can use a mirror specifically in evocation, but I will give today a simplification of this exercise, and we will save the full evocation practice for another video. But the practice that I'd like you to try is to simply open yourself up to receiving guidance from an outside source. What this outside source is can be whatever you want it to be, whatever you believe it to be, whatever works for you. But let's keep an open mind and see if we can receive a bit of guidance on an issue that we're maybe having trouble with. For this practice, I want you to sit down knowing what you're seeking guidance on. If you need help deciding whether or not to take a job, which school to apply to, where to move, any type of question that you feel you don't have enough information to make a decision about, that would be a great question to bring to this exercise. So, with your question in mind, sit down in front of your mirror. Clear your mind. Hold closely into your mind the question and allow all other thoughts to fade away. If you're comfortable with sigilization, you may want to sigilize your question and just imagine the sigil. This will help and make it easier to find inner silence while still maintaining concentration on your query. Now, rather than projecting images onto the mirror, simply gaze at it using the scrying technique we went over in the last video. Allow whatever images may appear to appear, and be open to receiving guidance not just through visual imagination, but also through audio imagination or simply through a sense of knowing. Some of the best guidance we can receive comes not through words or images, but comes through knowing. And you'll know it when you know it. So, sit in front of your mirror, focus on your question, and allow all other thoughts to disappear. Watch any images, take note of any thoughts, feelings, sounds, or other hallucinatory aberrations. Anything that comes up, just take note of it. After you've sat for some time or you feel content, put away your mirror and write down in your journal all of the visions that you received, whether they were visual, audio, or emotional. Take note of them, and then come back to this after a day. I always like to have a bit of time to digest any type of guidance that I may have received. It may be very quickly that you walk away from this session knowing exactly the answer to your question, but what is also very common is to do this practice and really come away from it feeling like, okay, well, that wasn't helpful at all. But then in the coming days and weeks, to achieve a sort of acceptance, knowledge, and ease with solving whatever the problem is. For me, that's how a lot of my problems get dissolved, is not through a clairvoyant practice that gives me a vision that shows me the answer, but by seeking the guidance in the practice, the problem seems to fade away on its own, or the answer becomes very obvious to me in the coming days. So be open to receiving guidance in maybe a less obvious way. Just because it's less obvious, if you've still solved the problem, that's what matters. Okay, our third exercise comes right out of Franz Barden's book. He suggests using the mirror as a gateway for astral travel. So we can begin this process by taking a little mental journey into the mirror. For people who haven't done visual practice, this may sound very challenging, but I want you to try at least imagining that you can do it and trying to imagine what it would be like to do it, because that's going to be where this technique starts. So begin by sitting in front of your mirror and quieting your mind. I want you to gaze into the mirror and imagine that the blackness is not a surface, but rather a doorway into a deep, endless blackness. Now I want you to imagine yourself as if you were very small, sitting in front of the mirror. Stand up from where you're seated and step into the mirror, which should now tower before you. As you cross the threshold, continue to push forward into the darkness in the mirror. This may be challenging at first, and you may not see anything at first, but Barden assures us that after some time, we will begin to more clearly see the surroundings in what he calls the astral plane. Once you're done with your explorations, turn around and return back out through the mirror. Always return to your body when we're finishing these practices. I also like to make a strong declaration once I've sat back down into my body, declaring all parts of me now return. When we're doing any sort of mental or astral travel, it's very important that we return all parts of our consciousness to our body. David Shoemaker, in his book Living Thelema, points out that any astral travel done without this can lead to a sort of energetic leakage. He calls astral leakage. If we leave parts of our consciousness scattered about in different parts of the mental and astral plane, there will certainly be consequences, and they may be subtle at first, but again, in the same way that we waste so much energy with our inner monologue throughout the day, leaving parts of our mind in other planes is like that tenfold. It's an unknown part of our consciousness that is occupied with some other task rather than the current experience of life. So always return to your body entirely back the way that you came. When you finish with this practice, put away your mirror and write down your experiences in your journal. So I highly recommend you try this technique. It's very interesting, and it is the same fundamental idea that we're going to employ in future practices with astral travel. So keep an eye out for a full video on astral and mental travel in the future. But for now, I think this is a very juicy technique to sink your teeth into. So I highly recommend that everyone try this too. Okay, that's all I'm going to give you today. I think these are some great techniques and some cool ideas to get you started on playing with your mirror. I highly recommend you try this. And I also recommend you try some of these techniques when you're feeling like you have the hang of scrying. I would recommend trying it on different surfaces and also working your way into trying it in complete blackness. If you have a room without windows that can get completely black, I encourage you to try any one of these techniques just gazing into the blackness with your open eyes in a dark room. This is a really powerful technique, and I'd like to do a whole video on this in the future. Clairvoyance is not a thing that people are born with. It is a technique that some people are maybe more natural at, but anyone can learn and we can all get better at. So even if you think that you aren't a visual person, I encourage you to try these techniques and suspend your belief that you aren't a visual person. A lot of the times, most people are more visual than they realize. They're more capable of experiencing visions and clairvoyance or clairaudio than any of us believe. And again, I want to remind you that any experience that you have, even if you don't think it's the experience it's supposed to feel like, look like, or be like, is very important because it's the experience you had. And that is what matters. So always, no matter what the experience was, write it down in your journal afterwards. So I look forward to seeing you at the next video, which is going to be a bit longer. I'm working on the research for that one right now, so bear with me as I put that one out. I hope this gives you some great stuff to work on in the meantime. And if you have any great experiences, tips, or other exercises, please drop them below in the comments. I really appreciate all the likes, subscribes, and comments. They super help the channel. And I really want to keep making these videos, so please subscribe. I've got some great ideas for some longer videos that I want to do coming up this summer when I have a bit more free time to do them. So I'm really looking forward to this summer I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So great. As always, you've been incredible. I've been Finch, and I will catch you next time. See ya.